Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo podcast. And unfortunately, you have just failed your 50-50 because we are off banner this week. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey everyone.
And on this off banner, you've managed to pull One Piece, which is going to be what we discuss this week. It's one of the longest manga and anime of all time, longest running, and I think by volume, it's one of the longest. I think it's only beaten out by things like Hajime no Ippo and a couple, comics from the 60s, 70s. But yeah, we're going to talk about good old Oda's creation, and I guess to jump right in, Dave, why don't you tell us about sort of how you got introduced to One Piece and so forth, and I'll cover how I got introduced to it.
Yeah, so for me, One Piece, I had always heard about it, but never actually watched it. I'm sitting here going 1,000 episodes. That's a big commitment. 1,000 episodes is a big commitment, and also, how am I going to watch all of them, right? Because not necessarily all of them were available to the U.S. population, early on, especially early on, with much ease. It's obviously become easier over time, but especially in the beginning, not so much. And so it was kind of always on the radar. And I think what ultimately pushed me over the edge to watch it was kind of a conversation I was having with our group of friends, and you were in that circle as well. And ultimately, you pushed me into watching. I'd say it's not like you had to do much coercion or anything. Like I was, you barely had to twist my arm. Like I was willing to do it. It's not, I don't want people to think like you were really insistent about it. No, you just, Dave, you really should watch it. Okay, fine. Like I didn't even let you. Okay, fine, I'll watch it. And then I would be giving you constant updates on where I was with it and how my watching was going. And I was off to a pretty fast clip in terms of watching the shows. It ultimately slowed down for me. I got to the end of what was available through your typical streaming services of the Hulus, the Netflix, stuff like that. And then I eventually had to break down. I ended up getting Crunchyroll so I could watch uh, the rest of the anime, and then ultimately, the newer releases that have been coming out here. And so it's your fault, basically, is what I'm saying. It's your fault.
Okay.
I've started watching One Piece, and then giving you, periodic updates. And again, I've only watched the anime. I've not read anything. And so as far as where the anime versus where, the manga is, obviously the manga is a bit further ahead. So that's where I am story wise. I've officially caught up as of last month to the fan letter being the most recent anime episode, and then they have gone on the 6-month hiatus. So that's where I am as of a month ago. And I guess I started the journey a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, but I had about like an 8-month break due to real life circumstances, which personal I won't get into. But that's my journey with One Piece. What about you? Where did your fandom originate with Oda's work?
So, for me, it was in college. I needed a cheap way to keep myself entertained, and online scanlations of manga were a pretty good source of cheap entertainment that can fill up a lot of time. So that's when I read Berserk. That's when I read through Bleach. That's when I started One Piece. And I guess just to date myself, this was all pre-Marine. This was back when the current arc when I started was Thriller Bark at the time. So, been reading for a while, and even at that point, it was I think 400, 500 chapters of the comic, and that felt like a big ask. Although, to be fair, I'd also read Hajime no Ippo and a bunch of other stuff at that time as well. So that's how I got into it. It clicked. I really enjoyed it. My only experience with it prior to that had been the bad 4Kids translation of it, of the television show, of the anime. and that had just completely turned me off. But once I had heard that no, that was just a bad translation, the censored and so on and so forth. Don't worry about it. The actual comic is much more serious and less goofy. Um, I was able to give it a shot, and that's sort of where it all kicked off for me. Um, so I guess the next sort of jumping off point would be what what is it that you enjoy about One Piece? Or I guess we should probably also, for those of you out there who might not know what One Piece is, what is One Piece? Um, so yeah, One Piece is a comic slash anime about pirates with superpowers. It's a weird mashup of Tex Avery and who trying to think of what a good comparison would be. Maybe Tex Avery and at this point Lord of the Rings in some ways, just how long this journey has taken. But I don't know. Would you say that that's an accurate summary of it, or an accurate description of it, or?
Yeah, so I think that that's a fair summary. Or if we want to, if you want to use another summary, it's a typical, coming of age tale, right? A boy going out, going on adventures, meeting friends, and through the power of friendship and these supernatural powers they acquire in the world, right? Overcoming the world government. If you like shows about overthrowing a world government that are hidden in a fun pirate show, this may be for you.
True, true.
Um, but as far as yeah, wh- what is enjoyable for it, or what has kept me with it? Because so many times, right, we maybe start a show. It doesn't even have to be an anime, but like we start a show, and we're like, I'll give it a couple episodes, to get a good taste, a good wet the palate, understand what the show's about, the characters. Is it like, is it funny? Is it dramatic? Depending on what genre it is, right? Does it check the boxes I'm looking for in this particular watch session, right? And so for One Piece, for me, going into it, I I was instantly, drawn to the characters that were introduced to early on. So obviously you're introduced to Luffy, who's the main character, and then shortly thereafter you're introduced to Zoro, whose goal is to wanting well, Luffy's goal is to become king of the pirates, as they'll tell you in literally every episode. It's a joke, it's a joke at this point, right? Um, and then Zoro, who wants to be the greatest swordsman in the world, and then you meet Sanji, who wants to be the greatest cook in the world, and you're just meeting all these characters that are very easy to identify with some aspect of their personality or some aspect of their drive to be successful and grow and develop. Um, and then the world that does that he builds in terms of the history of the One Piece and the intrigue of what is it and where is it, and the freedom of going into the seas and adventure to go find it, with the hints at corruption somewhere in the world, whether it be because of the nobles elites and versus the regular class people, or whether it be the world government, or whatever it is, tied in with these fruits that these devil fruits that give power to the person who eats them, at the exchange of the ability to the ability to swim in seawater, um, which obviously you can see some of the obstacles that devil fruit eaters will have, since this is again pirates out on the open seas and then they can't swim in the ocean type stuff. So, but all of those combined just kind of hit the right notes for me in terms of, again, characters and their personalities and what their goals and dreams were, and then the intrigue of the world that Oda does a really good job, I think, introducing you to pretty quickly and just setting the rules of the world,
Yeah.
to hook you in. But that's it for me. It was, what about you? What was, because you read the anime first, or I mean, you read the manga first before watching the anime,
Yep.
so you don't necessarily have character voice inflections. So you have your own like voices in your head for them. So what captured you for this particular one, as opposed to like going through Bleach, going through, other mangas at the time?
Um, I think it really was the intricacy of Oda's world building. The fact that the plotting in One Piece is very solid. Like he will introduce a concept in chapter one, that you won't find out is super important until chapter 1,000. I think there is literally there are a number of jokes and a number of plot points that take about that long to actually like hit. A good sort of solid example, and as is the rule for all off banners, spoilers might occur. Um, but a good sort of example of that would be Sanji's wanted poster, which actually comes back in multiple ways of, both in joke and in serious form. For example, Sanji's wanted poster is the only poster that is listed as wanted alive when they have a good picture of him. His original version of his poster being a bad drawing, which then there's a guy who actually looks like him. Um, there's a lot of little stuff that gets tied in and that, might start out as a joke or might start out as a weird inconsistency or kind of, that's odd. But then you'll find out why later. He introduces concepts super early. Hockey is something that you find out about technically during the Sky Island arc with the young girl who can hear everything. And then that ties back in later once you find out about how hockey works and so on and so forth. These are just, again, top of head examples. So just the intricacy of that world building combined with the fact that, Oda, humor is very much so a cultural thing, but I think Oda hits at least my particular funny bone pretty well. Like he's able to tell some solid jokes and good visual gags are included, along with some really solid emotional writing as well. Enos Lobby, that arc, hits you right in the feels. I mean, there's so many different moments that you can point to where it's like, oh yeah, that really was an emotional gut punch, or was a very cathartic moment in the story. So I know I'm gushing about Oda's writing, but I really do think he is one of the best out there. Like he's doing some solid work in this. He puts G.R.R. Martin to shame, in my opinion. Just in combination of the scope, the plotting, and so on and so forth. But I guess with that sort of said, let's jump to the crew real quick. So Dave,
Well, I want to keep it with story
you do want to keep it with story?
I have one more question with story.
Fair enough.
Because this is an anime and story that have gone through a lot of different adventures.
Mhm.
There are a number of different story arcs. But I just wanted to touch on maybe you have a favorite story arc, or maybe it's hard to pick one, but maybe one of your favorites, and you don't have to title it your favorite unless it actually is. But what's a story arc that stood out to you or that you really enjoyed reading or maybe watching?
I mean, you are making me choose my favorite child, but you are in luck. I do have a favorite child. I would say the Enos Lobby is a really strong one. I think I would go with the prison arc. Pre Marineford, where Luffy's in Enos Lobby is the actual is the I'm trying to remember the name of the prison. And completely blanking. But yeah, it's the section pre Marineford where Luffy is trying to break Ace out of prison. That section of the story.
Impel Down?
Impel Down, thank you. That's what it was. Impel Down is, I think, my favorite section of the story. It leads up to so much good stuff in Marineford. It has the return of some of my favorite characters. I will say the only negative I have against it is that it doesn't have the full crew, but in some ways that lets it expand and do interesting things that other story arcs aren't able to do. So yeah, I would say favorite by a very slim hair would be Impel Down. But
And I was gonna say, and it's fair you didn't remember the name, right? When you have so many children, sometimes it's just because they're all your babies, right? It's hard to remember them all. So it's forgiven even if it is one of your favorite. So for me, one of my favorite ones is probably going to be the War of the Best.
Okay.
And that maybe seems cliche, or people like it for a number of different reasons. But that one stood out to me for a couple reasons. The biggest one being it was the first time we had to deal with a major character death. Um, and so yeah, obviously we're gonna be breaching the spoilers here about the War of the Best, right? So when Ace dies in this fight, that is something that the anime hasn't really done to this point. We maybe had character deaths or dealt with things off screen, uh, but in terms of major characters who have a major impact on the crew or have a major relationship, in this case Ace being Luffy's brother from growing up,
Mhm.
that was just such a moment for me. I was like, oh man, I didn't realize this was going to be an anime that would go this direction,
Mhm.
just based off of the 500 episodes or so it took to get to that point. So to not have that happen for 500 episodes or whatever it is, it's several hundred episodes before that occurs. It caught me off guard. And then you have to deal, of course, with the ensuing immediate aftermath in terms of like on the battlefield itself. And then, of course, you deal once that's done, you deal with the psychological aspect and Luffy and how he deals with it. And he almost absolutely breaks. And then Jinbei kind of keeps him in check and helps get through it. And I think it's a really strong growth for Luffy, but also it really gives us more insight to Jinbei, who we'd seen bits and pieces of him, especially like in the Impel Down story arc. We got to learn more about him, but this really kind of brought him into the crew, right? He was maybe a secondary character, like maybe Princess Vivi was from
Mhm.
Alabasta, but I think this moment and the ensuing events after it really, I think, brought him into being part of the crew, and so that's why that one stands out to me. On top of
Yeah.
all the other really awesome moments in terms of the fighting itself, Whitebeard, the appearance of Blackbeard, like all that stuff. But like that moment to me was the most um, uh, ex- exciting one in terms of plot moving forward because it's on character development
It
on this, and that maybe will transition us into talking about characters. But yeah, so that's where I am on that.
Well, since you've got us on plots, that I will stick with this for a little bit. I do
Okay.
agree that Marineford Battle of the Best is or War of the Best is it's a watershed moment in One Piece. There's a very clear before and after in it as a result of War of the Best, and I do agree that death is just it's one of those emotional moments that I was talking about earlier. But I guess since we've talked about the best, let's really quickly. Is there any particular story arc that you didn't enjoy, or that if you ever do go back and do a rewatch or do a reread or first read of the comic, that you would just skip or maybe kind of go, okay, whatever. Not a fan of.
Yeah, so I have two that immediately jump to my mind.
Okay.
One of them is I think it's a tamer take that may be socially acceptable to say. The other one's going to be potentially a very hot take
Okay.
that One Piece fans could flame me for a little bit. But the first story, well, I guess to very briefly, one of the main plots that I most enjoy is the poneglyphs and like their relation to the Lost period. Um, and so story plots that advance that narrative are really engaging to me.
Mhm.
And there's moments very early on where we're learning about these and we're maybe getting a little bit of Robin's backstory and her island. And then we get it's the Mario Party story arc with the pirate crew and they
Oh,
do all these
Foxy.
different games.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Foxy Pirates. Yeah, and they all do these little pirate Mario Party type games. They build boats or whatever have you. And it's not doing anything for me in general. And then also it came at a time where it was like I was ready for the next big story plot development and it just didn't come for 15 episodes, 20 episodes, whatever it was. So that's kind of my tame take.
Mhm.
Um my hot take in terms of a story arc that I did not enjoy would be, and I'm a little nervous to say it because of blowback I'm probably gonna get, the Wano story arc.
Mhm.
I did not enjoy the Wano story arc in terms of the character, a lot of the characters of from Wano that
Mhm.
we got to know more about. The length of the story arc was absolutely unnecessary, and we didn't get too much development in the global stage, world government, celestial dragon type stuff. We were given little breadcrumbs, and that's why you have to watch it because he may sprinkle in a little breadcrumb here and
Mhm.
there that will ultimately get tied in way down the road. But there was a moment during the story arc where we literally learned about, we learned about the characters and being sent through time
Mhm.
and, everything that was associated with that. And we learned about Odin and his fall from grace, as it were.
Mhm.
And then we get like 10, 12 episodes showing what they just told us in 15 minutes. And I'm just like, please, what are we doing? Please, please, no, please. Like, a lot of that
Yeah.
middle section could have been cut out, and then we could have just gotten to the fight with Kaido that much quicker. That, and I absolutely loathe Momonosuke.
Mhm.
I don't like him as a character. I didn't like him from when he was initially introduced to us. Then he eats the dragon fruit, gets to become this awesome dragon, and he's still, for lack of a better word, he's still a bitch.
Yeah.
He's still a little crybaby. Luffy calls him out on it.
Yeah.
He toughens up a little bit, but he's still ultimately a little bitch.
Yeah.
That's the most blunt way to put it. Uh, yeah, so I am ready for the blowback, whether it be from you or
No.
whether it be from anybody else that's listening that loved Wano. But what about you, Steve? Any story arcs that you skip over when you rewatch this?
I do have one or two, but I really quickly do want to loop back to Foxy, the Foxy Pirates arc, or the
Okay.
Pirate Games arc. I can't remember what the exact name of it is.
You're gonna go after my tamer take, okay?
Well, so the main reason why is because I used to agree with you, but then totally not Mark, another YouTuber. I guess I can call him another YouTuber. We're YouTubers now, so I'll far more successful, but another YouTuber called Totally Not Mark did a watch through of One Piece or a read through of One Piece, and he got to that section, and he had a take on it that I actually really liked,
Okay.
which is that section of the story is setting up Marineford, which again sounds crazy, but basically it's hitting the point in the story where Luffy can't just shonen hero his way through to success all the time. Like he legitimately struggles in that story. He in the final boxing match that he has, which is it's goofy and fun, but it's one of those where he's knocked down like 3 or 4 times and he just keeps on getting back up, but each time it's a struggle. And it's hitting to a point where it's like, no, Luffy, you're hitting your wall here. Like, eventually, you're not going to be able to just gung ho your way through all of your problems. And admittedly, because of the timing of all the arcs work, it's far enough displaced from Marineford and so forth that you don't really notice that through line. But I do think that was an interesting take on that arc that made me go back and reconsider it. I still skip it when I go and read through, but it is an interesting take. As for, I think, my most unloved arc, I'm not going to say that there's any one that I really hate, even at least in comic form. Wano is a little bit more acceptable for me. It does drag on, but I can usually, like, I'm fine with it. I think the worst one is Thriller Bark for me, and that's mainly because the the start of Thriller Bark is really poorly paced and really poorly set up and confusing, with Usopp and Nami and Chopper going to the island, and then they meet up with people and they have their own little adventures, and Luffy and so forth shows up, but it's all kind of weirdly disconnected and it doesn't fit or flow very well. Like it feels like a weird jumbled mess at the beginning. It eventually straightens itself out, but the early part of Thriller Bark is just not good, or not as good or up to the standard that I would hold the rest of the series up to. So usually Thriller Bark is where I kind of have to at least skip forward until I get to the final fight or a later fight.
Get introduced to Brooke.
We do, and I again, Brooke is a great character. It's just that that early section when they first arrive at Thriller Bark is muddled and confusing. And I remember when I was first reading through One Piece, that was one of the points where I'm like, okay, I got to take a break because something's something's not clicking here. Um, but yeah, that Thriller Bark would be, I think, my least favorite.
So for Thriller Bark, maybe not necessarily a fun, but a fact for me, that was the first um story arc
Mhm.
that I had to watch subtitled because the dub didn't exist in what I had access to at the time. So I was transitioning from hearing the English voice actors to now hearing the Japanese voice actors, and then familiarizing myself with who was whom,
Mhm.
type thing. Um, so maybe I missed some of the discombobulation because I attributed discombobulation to I wasn't familiar with the voice actors yet. So that's maybe why I don't look back as negatively on this YouTube.
And it could be that the anime does it a little bit better. From what I remember from when I watched the anime, I had similar issues of pacing and so forth. But yeah, that would be. I think that would be my low point of the series, just from a structural point of view.
Okay.
Um, but
But let's
oh,
let's move it to characters because
okay.
we mentioned, oh well, this is where we met Brooks. So let's move it to characters, Steve. I'll let you kind of where do you want to go? Where would you want to start with characters?
Um, again, I'm going to kind of assume that if you're listening, you're at least vaguely aware of who the characters in One Piece are. But just,
Yeah, I'd say 30 minutes in
yeah,
by this
30 minutes
point,
in,
if they're still listening, they don't know One Piece. We appreciate you.
yeah, we do appreciate you. A lot of
Go
this
watch
is
One
not going to
Piece.
make a lot of sense. So I guess let's just start with, of the crew, you know, who's your favorite, who's your least favorite? Um,
Oh, well, this is easy. I will start negative and then I will end on the positive. So, far and away, my least favorite is Usopp. That's just he is uh he yeah, a lot of issues I have with him. He has a couple moments, couple redeeming things that make him more tolerable. But man, especially early on, just his compulsive lying and what he's lying about. Just it's yeah, uh, brutal. Again, he has a couple redeeming moments, and then he goes through the Sniper King phase, and then gets a little less annoying, but is still ultimately my least favorite. My favorite crew member is far and away Nico Robin. Uh, Absolutely love her from her introduction to us as Miss All Sunday and working with Crocodile to her ultimately shift to joining the crew, the character, development with Ennis Lobby and the I Want to Live stuff. Also the memes that like nobody looks good falling downstairs, but then there's the bit where she's falling down the stairs is phenomenal, phenomenally drawn. But no, she's a great character. Just I love the the way she interjects like her humor, like when she has a humorous line or something like that, and she just says something that's factual and very realistic, based down to earth, and like Chopper and Usopp freak out, like why would you say something like that? It's like that's the situation.
yeah.
Her history, with being the only one to come, to come from her island surviving, and then the origins of her island of researchers just being absolutely obliterated and what that means for the main story. Uh, again, part of this also has to do with I am intrigued by the poneglyphs and how they relate to the lost period, and then since that's so closely tied to her story and what she is pursuing, I think there's already a natural affinity for me to like her as a character because of that commonality. Uh, but again, I think great character, thoroughly enjoy her, and then closely behind, if I had to do a number two, it's tough. It's tough for me to separate like Luffy, Sanji, Zoro, and Nami. I maybe depending on the story arc. I would interchange those four in the 2 through 5 slots, but Robin's easily number one. Usopp easily last place, and then the rest very closely meshed in the middle. But what about you, Steve? Where do you land on least favorite and favorite?
Um, I see. I posed the question, and now that I have to answer it, I'm sitting here going like, "Oh
Now
man,
you are literally choosing
yeah,
one of your babies. Like,
yeah." I will. Okay, I think it will be easiest to start with who's my least favorite, and I think Chopper is pretty easily my least favorite. I can at least come up with moments with most of the other crew that have a fist pump moment or go like, "Yeah, I'm super happy to see them on screen." Chopper has become more and more of just a mascot character, and he's not the worst, but he's definitely the character that I feel like after his initial story arc, he hasn't really grown any. Like he's gained new powers and new abilities, but he's
he quite literally grows. But yeah, go ahead.
well,
No,
yes,
I know
but I
what you meant.
meant
I know
like
what you
from
meant.
a
The
character
pun
point
was
of view.
there,
Yeah,
low hanging fruit.
yeah.
Go ahead.
But from a character point of view, he's pretty static, and his static mode is he's a cute little reindeer kid. Um, so yeah, Chopper would be probably my least favorite. As far as most favorite, the troll in me kind of wants to say Usopp, but it wouldn't be 100% wrong to say Usopp, um, because yeah, I think it would be Usopp or Sanji would be my two. And the main reason why Sanji, I think, has been knocked out is because of a lot of his more recent arcs just haven't done him any favors. Uh, a lot of the more recent story arcs have kind of pushed Sanji into a more support role, like he's fallen behind from the rest of the crew. And the stories that he has gotten are rather ho hum, especially post Big Mom and Pudding and so forth. If they hadn't
Hmm.
undone his character development with Pudding, I think he would still be number one. But the fact that they like had him just completely undone from that, um,
Can you elaborate what you mean
yeah,
by
yeah,
undone from that story
yeah,
arc?
yeah. So, for those of you who might not be aware, there was a story arc recently, 5 years ago at this point. Anyways, um,
Relatively, but go ahead.
relatively recently, where Sanji is going to be forced into an arranged marriage with a young woman named Pudding. Pudding has the ability to manipulate memories, and Sanji and her basically have a mini romance arc. But at the end of the arc, Pudding removes Sanji's memories of Pudding and what they've done together, and sort of the functionally the whole storyline of that island from Sanji's point of view. She removes memories of her from him, and he basically just kind of goes off and continues doing his own thing. Um, and that felt like a very it felt like Oda doing it because Oda has been very explicit on saying he doesn't want to write romance. So he does a romance subplot and then basically retcons it immediately. Um so yeah, I think if it wasn't for that arc, I would probably say Sanji, but otherwise Usopp, because for all the reasons you don't like Usopp is I think the reason why I love Usopp. Usopp is the character who is the most real. I will admit his early um, pre the Grand Line, like before you hit oh, what is the name of that town? Loge Town. Pre Loge Town, I would say Usopp is pretty insufferable. But everything after that, he's my favorite. Like he is such a fun character to me. Sniper King or Soge King, as he is in the Japanese, is amazing. It is a great joke that I never don't find funny. Um, the fact that he has his own theme song in the anime is amazing. And the fact that he sings his own theme song just to himself is great. Like that is amazing. What happens to him post time skip is great. The fact that he just keeps on falling ass backwards into more and more power and is the most like the highest bounty member of the crew is great. Yeah, I love Usopp. Usopp is great. I will admit that he has a very rough start. but he has nowhere to go but up, and he shoots up like a rocket for me. Um, so yeah, I would say that would be those would be my two. I know it's probably heresy to not have Zorro as one of our two favorites, or have Frankie as one of our two favorites. Frankie is amazing. But
Yeah, I like I said, if we're having to rank them,
yeah,
right, that's kind of where our favorites and least favorites lie. But it's not to say that we don't hate any particular character. I would say I don't really like which is your favorite, but
yeah,
um, yeah, there's it's tough. It's tough because Frank, because they all have their redeeming qualities. They all have their things that are likable about them. So that's just matter of factly. If we have to rank them, that's where it falls.
yeah. Like the One Piece crew is probably some of the most solid characters
Yes.
I've seen in anime.
So to keep it with characters, but to take a step back from the crew, what are maybe some of your favorite or least favorite tertiary characters or secondary characters over the course of the show?
Um, so I would say Bon Clay is hands down my favorite tertiary character. Uh, Bon Clay is great. He is amazing. He can do no wrong. He is my perfect cupcake and angel. And the entire reason why I love Impel Down as an arc is Bon Clay is great in that. Um, Definitely, yeah. I would say he would be hands down number one. I don't want to just start naming off all of the side characters because
Yeah,
that'd just
there's a
be what
lot
it
of really
becomes.
well written ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll limit myself to Bon Clay, with the caveat that I am not discussing any villains or like main antagonist characters from any arcs because I want to do that separate. So
Okay.
just as like a tertiary support character, I would say Bon Clay.
Okay. Yeah, he was a fun character, and then when they're trying to lead, when they're escaping Impel Down to get to, I think it was to get to the War of the Best on time or
Yep.
whatever it was, and he essentially sat himself to be captured again to do it.
Mhm.
That was a great moment. They were the power, like, because they're friends.
I mean,
Like,
he was nothing but a bro throughout the entire
that was a
arc.
moment. Yeah,
Yeah,
a bro is the better term.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good colloquialism for sure. He was a bro. 100% agree. So for me, as far as like secondary characters, I, I mean, like you said, there's a number to pick from. I'll just very shortly name, from like early story arc. I really enjoyed Smoker. I like to see
Mhm.
more of him. I like that he came back in some recent story arcs. Um, because he seems like somebody in the Marines that it ultimately looks to do the right thing, and what is the right thing, even if it goes against Marine policy.
Yeah, he
Um,
feels like what Garp was to Roger, Smoker is to Luffy.
yeah, and he passes that same mindset on to, I forget her name, but his second in command, the one
Mhm.
the one who has to wear the glasses. I forget her name at the moment, but so I really liked him. And then in more recent story arcs, you know, characters like Trafalgar Law, really interested to see kind of where his story goes and how he continues his rivalry slash friendship with Luffy. And then as far as characters that just I scratch my head at, Buggy the Clown, for him to, you talk about Usopp falling ass backwards into more power. Buggy the Clown falls ass backwards into being a freaking warlord of the sea. Like, excuse me?
I can't even talk about because you're not the comic is ahead, so I can't talk about stuff. Okay, fine. Yes, you are 100% right, but Buggy is amazing. I love Buggy.
I, he, what an annoying character. And this will be my first reference to it, I think, and I think we may talk about it in its own section maybe a little later. But the live action,
Mhm.
Buggy the Clown, I think did a really good job, and they actually did a good job with the CGI in terms of bringing to life his chop chop fruit power.
Mhm.
But the character itself, man, how is he as powerful? It's just
I
it
mean,
is comical how he's
it,
risen to that position, because it's not through any strength or skill of his own. It's just the exact definition of right place, right time.
yeah. I mean, he was on Roger's crew, so like he's not nothing.
I know he's not nothing, but
Yeah.
but Crocodile and Hawkeye Mihawk would beat the tar out of him,
Yeah.
and they are underneath him in the order of operations in their Grand Cross coalition.
Yeah.
And yeah, and maybe something happens. Maybe something's coming in the future that manga readers know about that anime watchers do not. But that's where I'm at. I am an anime watcher of it, so I don't know what's to come. Please don't spoil it.
I'm not saying anything. Don't read the comments. Is what I'll say to you. Okay. So really quickly, I guess before to put a caveat or put a cap on this, because we could go for hours probably at this point.
For sure.
Let's talk about favorite villain, like favorite main antagonist of an arc, and then we'll briefly touch on the live action and the upcoming second season, and call it a day. Just to give you listeners kind of a
roadmap here.
Roadmap here. So yeah, main antagonist. Who is the best of the worst for you?
Main antagonists. Ooh, man, that is a tough one here.
Do you want to think on it and then have me
share yours? Yeah,
Okay.
share your thoughts so I can pick between. I got it down to a couple, but go ahead.
So I think my favorite antagonist is from Mermaid Island. And unfortunately I cannot remember the gentleman's name or the shark man's name. But the main villain of Mermaid Island is, I think, my favorite, just because he has one of the best lines in the show, which is where they're confronting him about why does he hate humans, and his entire response is like, I just hate them. Like what did they do to you? And he goes, nothing. They didn't do anything to me. I really hate them. I hate people because I'm just evil and bad, which is that one hit. He also served as a fun punching bag for a lot of the post time skip power ups.
Talking about Hody Jones.
Hody Jones was who I was thinking of. Yes. So yeah,
you had me curious. So instead of thinking about my villain, I looked it up. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're
buy me more time.
Yeah. So Hody Jones, I would say, is my one of my favorites, probably near the top. Even though again, he's pretty simple, not very complex. As far as what would be my worst, would be probably I can only think of him as Eminem, but it's from Sky Island, the angel guy. Give me 1 second, I can actually look up his name. He had the lightning fruit. Enel. Enel is the main villain of that. He was just not super interesting as a villain. Like there wasn't any fun plot twists or anything. He's also one of the few villains that just kind of wins. Like he gets everything he wants from the story, which is just kind of odd and bizarre. But yeah, I think those would be my two.
So for me, oh man, it's tough because there are a lot of good ones that are well done. I will probably just keep it simple and short. I'll go with recent memory in terms of villains would be Kuzan or Okiji.
Okay.
So he was, the former Marine admiral. He's got the ice, I don't know if it's ice fruit or whatever it is. Basically, it is the ice fruit. Okay. Yeah, his character and his story is interesting because we're introduced to him, right? He's a Marine admiral, not necessarily a villain or bad guy or even an antagonist in terms of how they're portraying it. And you actually see how he ties into Robin's backstory in that he lets her go.
Mm-hmm.
He lets her get off the island. And he didn't remotely had to. He could have filled his job duty, which was from the orders, was destroy the island, no survivors type stuff. And he let her go. So you're almost like, okay, this guy has a sense of kind of moral in terms of right and wrong and justice, and doesn't just blindly follow orders like others do. And then we fast forward to, the War of the Best and the fallout from that. And him losing the big 10-day fight to become the leader of the Marines, losing it to Sakazuki, and then ultimately leaving the the Marines, and ultimately joining Blackbeard. And then we get more of his backstory on the fight on the Honeycomb Island, or whatever the big pirate island is. That's actually a person that ate a devil fruit. I forget the name of the actual island.
Yeah.
But you get more of his backstory and his relationship with Garp and how tight they were. Like,
Hmm.
Garp was his mentor, and then those two are fighting. Those two are fighting it out to save um, our little boy hero. Oh, I forget his
Cody?
name. Cody. Yes, thank you.
Kobe?
There's so many characters, so many
Yeah.
names. So sorry if I'm not updated. But yeah,
I can't
so
throw any shade about forgetting names, but anyway.
so I would say Okiji is probably one of my favorites, just because of the complexity and of his, right. He was kind of a good guy, or he was a good guy in a bad system, and now it's like, I think he's just a bad guy.
I don't
In
know.
terms of
I don't.
fighting with on Blackbeard's sides, but
Mm.
even that, to me, based off of the interactions and like the scenes were shown where he joins Blackbeard's crew, even that's like, I don't know if this is
I'm
the end
50-50 on him
story
being
for
like him being a double agent or him pulling some stuff. Like he's always moved sideways, like into stuff.
yeah.
So
So I don't know about that. But yeah, he would probably be one of my most intriguing ones that I enjoy watching, and when his character speaks, um, and the fights that he gets involved in. Like, the fight with Garp was phenomenal, as was the bits and pieces we got from his fight. Um, we're told that it lasted 10 days and it
mhm.
ripped apart this island. Like, this island's ecosystem changed because of the fight between those two guys with the ice fruit, and then the other guy has what, the fire. Well, not
Lava.
fire. Yeah, lava. That's right. I was like, fire fruit's ace,
Yeah.
and not, yeah. So lava fruit, yeah. So that would be my villains.
Okay. Um, in that case, I guess let's really quickly jump into the live action show.
Okay.
So just, I guess, really briefly, what were your thoughts on the Netflix live action? Was it something that you felt did a good job of, you know?
So, being somebody who is very scarred from live action adaptations, like I mentioned, Cowboy Bebop, mentioned this in some of our podcast episodes. Cowboy Bebop is my favorite anime of all time, and that live action was so disappointing. Insert meme of what they did to my boy here. They absolutely murdered and completely changed characters and their development, removing some characters' developments, completely changed the story in and
Mhm.
of itself in terms of how it ends to be, for whatever reason, the message they wanted to send, rather than sticking to the source material.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm still a little bitter about it. Um, but for the One Piece live action anime, uh, I was very pleasantly surprised. They took the source material, I would say embraced the source material, and it was made, it almost seemed like it gave across the vibes of made by fans for fans type things in terms of a lot of the
Mhm.
Easter eggs and stuff that they put in there. But they do a good job across those first 8 episodes of the live action, encapsulating, I think it was about like 50 or 60 episodes of the anime, because basically it's the West Blue story arc,
Yeah.
all the way up through Arlong Park.
Mhm.
But I think they did a really good job with it. The actors did, I think, a good job in embodying the members of the crew that they were playing. There were a couple things that they changed storyline wise, but it didn't. I don't. I don't think it fun made. I don't think they changed anybody fundamentally, like down at their core,
Mhm.
by some of the tweaks that they made. So it doesn't bother me like Cowboy Bebop changes did. Uh, and I would say I'm very much looking forward to the second season, and how much they're gonna tell in that season of that, and then some of the characters going to introduce. Because obviously we're going to be introduced to Chopper. We're probably going to be introduced to Nico Robin, right?
I hope.
So her being my favorite character, I'm very much intrigued to meet her. And then Crocodile, of course, and that maybe the Alabasta story arc. But what about you, Steve? What were your takes on the One Piece live action?
Um overall, again, I agree with you. It felt much more true to One Piece than a lot of the other live actions that we've gotten for anime in the last 15 years. I do remember being kind of grumbly about some of the changes that they made. That, looking forward, it put them into weird, awkward positions where it's like, well, because you've changed this, you're there's further knock-on effects that are gonna come up if they ever get that far along. But there's also part of me that's sitting here going like, okay, we're at the second season, and if we're very, very lucky, they'll be able to fit the entirety of like up through the end of Alabasta. I don't think that they'll be able to. Like, that's a lot of content to try and fit into maybe 8 episodes. If they had 12, I could see it, but 8 episodes and then that's going to be tight. Um, so that then leads me to ask the question of like, okay, what's the end game for this? Because you can't just have these actors playing through, you know, 1,000 episodes worth of anime. Even if you do condense it down, like, man, 10 seasons,
That's
12
still a
seasons,
huge
yeah.
project, right? It's
Like,
like longer than what the Harry Potters would have been.
yeah, and considering that in universe, it's only like 3 years worth of time, these actors would be doing this for 12 plus years. Like, Luffy's not gonna look like he's gonna look like a middle-aged veteran by the time you get to Raftel. So there has to be some off ramp for them at some point. I don't know what that off ramp's gonna be. I don't know what they're gonna do for it. I just it's one of those where as much as I applaud them for doing the live action, there's a part of me that's also going like, this is a story that just doesn't function in live action form. Like, you're not going to be able to do this. Like, just from a practicality standpoint, this isn't going to work. Um, but I don't remember walking away from it super angry, just grumbly about some of the changes, but that's sort of my default state. I think we've kind of accepted on this podcast is that my default state is grumbling at things.
So I
So
will share of a story regarding the live action podcast. So similar to how you suggested to me, and I've been sharing with you my watch status. Periodically we'd get together, and I'd tell you where I was. You'd ask me questions about the plot or characters in the moment of where I was. So my younger sister, she and her husband were interested in watching One Piece. They came to me similarly how I came to you, and they had the same. It was literally saying the same thing. Like, that's a lot of episodes to watch, but we hear it's good. What should we do? And I told him, I said, watch the live action, and if you like the live action, then go watch the anime. And so they watched the live action, and I think the day, I think it was like 2 days after I know they'd finished the live action, I talked to her
mhm.
and her husband. And I said, hey, what you think of the live action? Are you going to be watching the anime? And they're like, we're on episode 40 of the anime. I was like, okay.
Okay.
It
Yep.
had been like 2 days, since
Yep.
they had finished it. So they have been to me what I have been to you in terms of experiencing somebody watch it for the first time. And like me, they have stayed spoiler free. So they don't know necessarily who would be joining the crew. They don't know anything about any of the storylines or plots, which has been really fun. And their watch rate, though, and if they're listening, they can maybe clarify this, but I don't believe I'm exaggerating when I think they are they're in Egghead now,
Okay.
and they started watching in March, end of March. I think the text message exchange was like a March 23rd ish, somewhere in there. So it was like
Yeah.
late March, and they had caught up or gotten to Egghead as of October. End of October, they were in Egghead.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's
It was there was a weekend that they want, or there was a week. I remember there was a week where they jumped, and I think the math to something like they were watching
it's like
30
150 episodes. Yeah.
episodes over, and now that they've, I think, caught up, they've moved on to some other animes while they're on the 6 month hiatus. So I've recommended things like Hunter x Hunter and other stuff.
Okay.
So, um, so yeah, so I think that the live action did a good job. I think it was true to existing fans of the show,
Yeah.
despite some of your grumbliness. Um, but it also did a good job bringing in new fans to then draw them to the anime. And of course, now we're on the hiatus. We have the remastered, I think, Fishman arc that's coming out on Netflix or is out on Netflix just recently, where they just went back and they basically updated and reanimated that particular story arc.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was around that time period that there was some drop off in quality. Because I remember Marineford kind of was after Marineford, the show began to really drag and have issues. I think they resolved some of that, but I'll be honest, I stopped. The latest I've watched the anime was to the end of the Fishman Island arc, and then after that, I haven't watched any of the live act or not live action, any of the animated stuff. So I'm full manga from that point forward.
And so that's live action. What was the next step on the roadmap, or did we hit everything?
I think we hit everything. We've got a solid hour underneath us of One Piece. I think if anybody wants more One Piece in their life, you should go out and watch the show or read the comic or
And if you want to discuss it, come on over to the Discord
yeah.
and discuss it with us there. We'll be happy to go even more in depth than we already did this evening.
And this was obviously a very high level discussion, which would be very confusing. If you are interested in a full breakdown of One Piece, let us know. That is something I'm more than happy to do.
Yeah, Steve will definitely be able to do that for sure. And even go into where the anime or where the manga story is, whereas I'm only going to be going to the anime plot lines. So, but we do want to thank you guys for joining us during this off-banner discussion. As we continue our hiatus for the podcast, just as a reminder, the podcast will be back on January 6th with our 4th season. So be sure, or no, 5th season. Math's hard sometimes. Yeah, it'll be so we'll start our 5th season on January 6th with a new episode. But you guys have a happy holidays and a happy new year. And until next time, and until 2025, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.